So just to start, I wanted to give like a preemptive warning that because I'm going to be talking about Bridgerton's The Duke and I, it does have a warning about rape and sexual assault. So if you know about this and you want to skip out on this video, it's totally okay. If you haven't heard, just as a preemptive heads up, I wanted to let you know that I will be discussing this in this video. Hey everyone, thank you for joining me again. As I mentioned in my last video, I was going to be talking about Bridgerton's The Duke and I. So here the book is. I picked up a physical copy because I was tired of reading on my phone and I decided to give my eyes a break, and it wasn't that bad in terms of price, so we'll see. It is the first book in an 8-book series following the Bridgerton family. There are 8 children in total, and each book follows one of the siblings. The first one, The Duke and I, follows Daphne, who is the 4th child in the Bridgerton family. Now, if you've watched the series, you would already know that basically, every single child in this family is alphabetically named in chronological order. So she has 3 older brothers, Anthony, Benedict, Colin. Then she's Daphne for the 4th. Eloise, I don't remember all. Francesca, George, and Hyacinth. I thought I didn't remember, but apparently I did. Now, the plot of the story basically is a engagement of convenience, or rather a relationship of convenience, where the Duke of Hastings and Daphne Bridgerton decide to pretend to have formed an attachment so that Daphne can find herself a husband and the Duke can basically get the eligible bachelorettes and their mothers off of his back as they go through a season together. Now, some of the big important players in this are obviously Daphne, the Duke, her mother Violet, and her brother Anthony. They kind of show themselves multiple times, and they have some action in the book in terms of directing the plot, but mostly the 2 perspectives that you bounce between are that of the Duke and of course that of Daphne. This is also published by Avon Books, so another historical romance actually, so another one brought to you by HarperCollins. And it's actually very, very well written. It's a pretty dense book, as you can see, and as opposed to The Dew Goes Down, the print is actually really small. I can give you a show here, and there's a lot that happens. It's written very well compared to The Duke Goes Down. She obviously understands the historical context of what she's writing in, so obviously the Regency era, if the cover and the show didn't, give it away. And she really does an amazing job at making it feel believable. The names, the actions, the behaviors, everything really makes sense. I was really, really pleased while reading it. It really kept up the fantasy of kind of living in that time, and I have to say that I did actually enjoy the book for a chunk of it. Now, onto some of the differences between the show and the book. If you haven't watched the show and you haven't read the book, then I don't know why you clicked this video, but spoilers, and I guess you can skip this. But from the very beginning, what you learn about Daphne is that this is her, 3rd season that she's going through in London. While in the show, it's her 1st season. She's kind of introduced to the Queen. She's been said to be the season's incomparable, the diamond of the season. But that is not the case for Book Daphne. Book Daphne mentions that she's pretty regular girl. A lot of guys consider her to be more of a friend than a romantic prospect. This is her 3rd season that she's gone through after having a couple of failed engagements, mostly because the men who have shown interest to her are either really old, so she's or she hasn't really formed any kind of attachment to in a friendship, or like, yeah, in a friendship manner, basically. So she was really, as a heroine, someone that I could relate to. I found that, like, also in terms of, Jane Austen and other types of Regency novels that I have read, opinions and her, overall behavior and composure did compare itself very well to others at the time that were written by women at the time. So again, she's a very realistic heroine. She's a very, very, like, empathetic character from the very beginning. There were kind of like slight difference, I'm not that picky, is that in the book she's a chestnut brunette, just like all her family is. Like, all her family are brunettes, while in the show, sorry, she's blonde, as you can see. I mean, and of course, like, the Duke of Hastings is black, and in the book he isn't. I mean, as far as we know, he, like, the skin color hasn't been mentioned, just that he has dark hair and blue eyes. So, like, he could be. This is like a fantasy novel. But her hair is brown. I'm laughing because I'm nitpicking, and I'm not trying to nitpick. I'm just saying, like, these were the differences. Like, this is just, like, aesthetically, this is what was a bit different. So on top of her not, like, presenting herself to the queen as she did in the show, being compared as being stated as being, like, the diamond of the season, some of the other big changes is that at the beginning of the novel, you are introduced to Nigel Pembroke, who's like a suitor of hers that is continuously pursuing her, even though, like, her brother has turned down the engagement and she has told him, like, she's not interested. He's still pursuing her. And in the show, he does have a bigger role to play. Like, he keeps introducing himself into the plot, and he's kind of a very annoying figure. And in the book, he shows up as just being like, oh yeah, this is how the Duke and Daphne meet. But after they've met, he completely disappears from the plot. Like, he's seen in the background, but never as a person that's actually interfering with their relationship or trying to get Daphne back. Another couple of important characters that are in the show but that aren't, or that are in the book but aren't in the show, are the Duke's nurse. That's taken over by Lady Danbury, who she's an amazing character in the book, and she's also a great character in the show. So it was really nice that they did that, so that you could see more of her character and how much of a, like, influence and how much of a place she had in his life. In the book, her character in the show is divided into, like, these two characters, like his nurse and also his, like, Lady Danbury, but very, very briefly, and she's not his mother's friend or confidant as she is in the show. She is somebody that, like, knew his family but doesn't really place that much of, like, a personal tie to. And of course, in terms of the family itself, as I mentioned, the focus is mostly between Daphne, Violet, and her brother Anthony. Some of her other brothers, like Colin and Benedict, do pop in every once in a while. Colin more than Benedict. But you don't see the others as much, especially her other sisters. Like, you don't see Eloise at all, and you don't see her speak at all. And in the show, she's, like, pretty much running around and, like, harping about, like, modern feminism and stuff like that. And she's a very interesting character in the show, but in the book, I was disappointed not to see her there. I was disappointed not to see as much of the family interactions as you see in the show. As for Anthony himself, he's not half as annoying as he is in the show, which I thought was really interesting. I kept waiting for him to be like that stupid pig-headed guy that he is, and he is stubborn, but he's not to the same point as he is in the show. It's very understandable why he speaks out against the Duke as much as he does. Like, he obviously understands that the Duke has no intentions of marrying Daphne from the very beginning because he's been friends with him from school, and so he's trying to protect his sister from him because he doesn't want her to form any emotional attachment to him and then be disappointed. So it's completely understandable his behavior in the book. In the show, they took it to, like, an extreme that really wasn't necessary. And I'm wondering if a lot of what was in the show took from the other books to supplement and kind of make the other characters more interesting, because as I mentioned, each of the books follows one of the siblings, and if they're going to do every season for every book, then they have to kind of make each character interesting to the reader, or to the watcher in this case, or else we're not going to want to keep watching the seasons, because as soon as like Daphne's life is done, her arc is done, like why would we want to keep watching about Anthony or Benedict or Colin if we aren't introduced to them and made to see them as empathetic characters, or even at least interesting characters. Now, the show follows the plot of the book pretty consistently. If you've watched it, then you know they meet together, they pretend this whole engagement. Daphne and the Duke get found in a compromising situation by her brother, and basically they do have a duel because the Duke is again refusing to get married. And then Daphne basically tells him that they were seen in the garden by others than just her family. And so to save her honor, he agrees to marry her. After that, they move back to his childhood home in Cliveden, and she basically finds out that it's through choice that he's not going to have children, and not through like a physical inability to have children. He's not barren or infertile. I guess those two technically mean the same thing. There's the infamous rape scene that happens, and a big argument comes. They split up. She's not pregnant, but then they reconcile and come and get back together and decide to have children and move on with their life. This whole arc presented in the show wasn't, I want to say, that bad. It wasn't that bad. I had heard, of course, a lot of criticism towards Daphne's behavior towards the Duke in terms of trying raping him. And although I was a bit not fully convinced that I could consider what happened in the show as being rape, because she didn't, basically, I might as well just spit it out. I didn't really consider it rape because she didn't really know what was happening. Like, it was coming from a place of ignorance rather than power. She was just trying to understand if what she was being told, that a man has to finish in her for her to get pregnant, was actually the truth, and trying to see, okay, has this man been lying to me this entire time? What is actually happening here? And although her behavior was understandable, it was still wrong, but I didn't consider it to be rape in the show. And you can disagree with me on this, and I've read plenty of articles of people who explain why they consider it to be, and that's totally fine. Yeah, I've read them, and I completely understand their opinions and their points of view, and this is not something that we can ever for certain agree upon, because it's not a real world trial. I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, and we're not in that time anymore. So do I think that it needed to be in there? No. Do I think that it could have been written in a different manner? Yes. So on that aspect, I completely agree with everybody that it didn't need to be there, but I didn't really consider it to be rape. So that's all I'm saying. For the book, however, holy crap, is that rape? Holy Mother of God, is Daphne super manipulative throughout the whole book. When you first get to meet her and she has her first couple of manipulations, you're just okay, it's her just trying to navigate this sphere as best as she can, because she's a woman and she's trying to make a good match and blah 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 blah, and you're okay. But looking back, I think this feels like an origin story for a villain. It really does. By the time that I got to that scene, and it happens really late in the book, I was just so turned off by her, and I didn't want to finish the book. And I only had maybe 10 pages left, and I was just no, I don't like this character. This person, that action and how she tries to justify it and even twist it around, really I was no, I'm done. Nah, you need to own this. You need to own what you did. From the very beginning, how, she got into this agreement with the Duke, and the Duke said, like, I'm not gonna marry you, like, I have no intentions of getting married. And she's like, yeah, that's not a problem. But what if I changed his mind? What if I'm the special one that's gonna change his mind? And then, like, she decides that she's in love with him, and, like, basically manipulates him into following her into the garden where they are eventually found. She knows that first of all, she knows that her brother is watching them like a hawk. She knows that. She sees it. She mentions it, like, to the Duke, and the Duke mentions it to her. And she still's like, oh, let's go on the patio to catch some air. And he's like, well, I guess that's not a problem because there are a lot of couples outside on there, so, like, your brother shouldn't have a problem because, we're not going to be away from eyes. You know what I mean? Like, somebody's always going to be around. So they go out, and there's like, oh, there's not that many people, or there weren't any people at the time. And she realizes that he's, like, kind of flirting with her. And she's like, let me see if, like, we can take this to the next level. And so she's like, I'm going to take a walk in the garden. And he tells her no, that she shouldn't be doing that, and that it's not appropriate for both of them to be going together in the dark in the garden. And she's like, well, I'm going to go by myself then. And he's like, no, that's even worse. Like, what happens if you're caught by, like, another man? Like, it's totally dangerous for you to do that. She's like, well, I'm going to do it. I don't care. So she basically forces him into following her into the garden. Like, they end up, like, making out. Her brother catches her because obviously he's, like, keeping an eye and keeping time on how long they're outside, realizes they've been gone for a while, and, like, races to find them. Not to mention we just walked away from a patio where a lot of couples go out to. So there's just because, like, there was a moment where nobody was there doesn't mean that there weren't others also hiding in the shadows watching them and just wanting, like, a moment of privacy. So first she does that. And when she gets home, she talks to her brother Colin after he comes back from the party a couple of hours later. And it turns out, like, his friend saw them leave into the garden. And she's like, oh, is the friend going to say anything? And he's like, no, like, he's a good guy. He's not going to say anything. And she's kind of disappointed, like, oh, no, he's not going to. But wait, what if I pretend that other people, like, oh, if he saw me, then of course that means other people saw me. So obviously, like, this is how I'm going to save Simon from the duel. And again, like, in the context of the timeline as I'm reading this, it makes sense. Like, she just seems like a girl who's made a wrong choice. She's in love with this guy, she's, decided to seduce him because he's been, like, flirting with her, and he's obviously open to her seduction. So everything is going fine, and she's like, I really want to save this man because I love him. I don't want him to die. And I'm like, yeah, of course not. Like, totally understandable. And so she saves him by saying, hey, people saw it. And you're like, yeah, maybe, adding a bit of a white lie to this, but whatever, like, just making it a little bit bigger than it actually is to save this man's life. Okay, that's totally okay. I can get behind that. And then he tells her, he can never have children. And she's just like, that's fine. I have you. Like, we'll be okay. And I'm like, okay. So I know, because I watched the show, that it's not from a physical inability to have children that he's not having children. It's because he's choosing not to. And so far, like, she's in complete agreement with what he said. Like, he has withheld truth from her, yes, but he hasn't told her anything that she shouldn't be taking seriously into consideration when thinking about marrying him, which is, she's never gonna have children. So as I'm reading, I'm trying to get to the part where what happens in the book and what happens in the show, but that scene of her realizing that it's through his choice and not through a physical, like, because he's barren, that scene happens before the rape scene. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is why it was different in the show. And I'm, like, wondering, like, okay, why did they do it this way? But yeah, she confronts him after they have sex that, why isn't he finishing in her? Why is he finishing on the bed? And she basically learns that, yeah, he's choosing not to have children with her. So she gets super upset, kicks him out of the room. And I'm like, yeah, totally fair. She's upset. She's allowed to have like a moment to like process this. He goes out, gets drunk, fights a couple of guys, comes back. And she lets him back in her room in the morning to have a chat. And because he's super drunk, she lets him lay down on her bed. And he's like, no, come on, stay with me. Like, I don't want to lose you. I really love you, blah, blah, blah. Or I really care for you. And she's like, okay. So she like lays down next to him. They both fall asleep. And when she wakes up, it's still day. He's still passed out and kind of like super drunk. And the rape happens, where basically she finds out that men, can have a hard-on when they're sleeping. And she's like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of him. Like, literally, she's like, I'm going to take advantage of him. And he is not in his right mind. So I can get him to come in me, and I can get a child, and I'm going to show him that it's not as big of a deal as he's making it, he thinks it is. And then she proceeds to do that. And then he looks at her and he's like, please don't do this. Because like he's super drunk. He has like no control over his like full body because like she's holding him down. And yes, he is physically stronger than her, but he's also super drunk. And he's kind of like, yeah, I can't even. And so he's looking at her and he's like, please don't do this. And she still does it. And I was just like, what the fuck? What the flying fuck did I just read? This was completely different than in the show. Completely different. And it was completely unacceptable. Like, this whole thing. Like, and then pages right after he, like, gets upset with her and leaves, she's there like, oh, I didn't think to myself, I have power over him, so I'm going to, take advantage of him. And I'm like, yes, you did. You did think that. I can flip to the page. It's like, it's just a page away. I can flip it and I can show it to you that you thought this. And I honestly don't know if Julia Quinn, the writer, added this page in, because this is a second edition or third publishing edition of this novel. This one came out in like 2015, and it was originally published in 2000. So I don't know if when she added the second epilogue to this book, she also added these like pages in at the end to like excuse Daphne's behavior, because it doesn't make any logical sense from what she said previously, and it also doesn't excuse her behavior. So I was like, why are you even writing this? And so she tries to like, again, like force him into being like, and to explain the fact that like she's pregnant now, and it's not such a big deal, and he shouldn't let his father control his life, which, yes, I completely agree. And I don't know if you guys remember from the show, but basically it's the same thing in the book. One of the reasons why the Duke of Hastings doesn't want to have a child is because he stutters, and his father completely neglected and abused him when he found out that he stuttered. So he's decided not to continue the line of the Hastings, of the Bassets, sorry, because that's his actual last name, because he's decided that his father cared more about the lineage than he cared about people like him and his mother. So he's like, screw you, I'm not going to have kids, I'm not going to get married, like, I'm just going to finish the line. And that's why he was kind of eager to die through the duel, because he's like, okay, there, I've completed my ultimate revenge. Not only have I not gotten married, not only have I, not had any children, but I died young, so, the line dies with me, officially. And so, like, she knows about this, and instead of just giving it time to heal and time for him, because the beginning of the novel's just when his father has passed away. It's maybe like a couple of weeks after he's passed away. The Duke of Hastings has returned from his adventure across the world, and he meets Daphne. And like, I think in total it may be like 2 months, a 2-month span. No, I'm lying. From like when they meet until they're married and this whole scene pans out, it's maybe like a month and a half of time has passed by, and she's already like forcing him to, she's already raping him, instead of just having a normal effing conversation with this man and giving him time to heal and time to process, the trauma that he's gone through with somebody that loves him. Like, instead of just giving him time, she's like, nah, I'm going to force this, because by forcing it, obviously everything's going to be okay. And it's just so, like, inconceivably selfish and so inconceivably abusive that I really felt bad for the Duke Simon the whole time, because like you see his perspective during the length of the novel, and he's such a good person. He's actually a nice, kind person. He really cares for Daphne. He really cares for his friends. He's trying to do the best that he can while keeping this oath of vengeance to his father. And everybody's like being super mean to him and like accusing him of being cruel towards Daphne, when he's like made his intentions clear, when he's like been very upfront with who he is as a person and what he can and cannot do and what he can and cannot offer her. And you come to this scene and it's just like, it really broke my heart how he was treated by her and by the author, how his trauma was just like thrown aside as being like, well, you need to get over it ASAP because we got married and we need to have children. And I was just like, why? Like, she's only like 21. I'm like, you have plenty of time to have children. Like, why are you forcing your husband to like go through trauma right now just because you have zero empathy for the other person? And I found it really interesting that she kept going off about how, or in her mind, she was going on about how, she grew up with a family, she grew up with all this love, and she really felt bad for Simon for not having this. And I'm like, you're showing him zero love and support that you say that you learned like to give and receive because of your large family. Like, your whole behavior is of a selfish only child, of someone who like has zero patience. Like, the one person here who seems to have like that love and care and empathy is Simon, who didn't grow up with a whole ass family. And so it's really, really, really frustrating. And then at the end, how like Julia twists that fight that they had after she rapes him into him being more upset about the fact that he was stuttering rather than like her actual actions, was even more frustrating, because it was like, what? Like, because he in the show you don't see it as much, but he does stutter throughout the length of the book. Like, he's still stuttering. He's able to control it, and he's still able to like pretend that he's not, because he has like behaviors that he does to make it appear that he's not. Like, he'll stop and he'll take a breath as if like he's controlling his anger, when really he's trying to control his words and his mouth. Basically, he'll take a sip of tea when he feels that he's it's getting too strong, or he'll like go into a coughing fit to pretend that he just to cover up that he's about to stutter, or he's starting to stutter. So when he gets into this argument with Daphne and he's like stuttering through it, it's this big thing, and it felt like so traumatic, because it really echoes the argument that he has with his father at the beginning of the novel when he's a child. And like, to see it happen again with like his wife, this person that has told him that she loves him and she wants to protect him and blah 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 blah, and she's okay with not having children, and like she's done all these terrible things to him, it made me again like really, really upset, and really upset for him specifically. And I really couldn't continue the book. I really couldn't see how they could ever have a happy ending, and I didn't enjoy how it was twisted for them to have a happy ending. And I honestly, if I read this book and I hadn't watched the show, and we didn't have fans who had read the series, the Bridgerton series, and have said that it gets better, that this is like the worst one of the series because of what happens, I wouldn't have continued it. Like, I'm still going to read the next one, The Viscount Who Loved Me. But if I had to read this one on its own, I wouldn't have continued it. I wouldn't have continued the series. And I'm trying to think of it as a book that was published in the 2000s, which, is over 10 years ago, and trying to take into consideration like the political atmosphere at the time, like the knowledge of sexual assault. And obviously it was a different time, but I can't handle her manipulation. I think that was like the biggest turnoff for me. Like, obviously what she did to him was terrible, and like, but the manipulation behind it is just so worse because she's been doing it this entire time, and it comes off as so innocent and so well-meaning, and then when you see the build-up of like these small actions, these small manipulations that lead to something bigger, it feels so like evil. It feels so cruel, and that's why I thought this was the origin story of a villain. Like, how could you do this to someone that you said that you love? Like, why are you such a terrible person? You grew up with a family who loved you, who supported you, and like, how dare you pretend to play the victim after you did this to your own husband? Like, how dare you? Like, you're a fucking terrible human being. And at the end, when you find out that, you know, she got pregnant one after the other, she had 4 kids in the first 4 years of her marriage, I was like, you don't deserve this. Like, and I don't even know how it's physically possible that she was able to do this without dying. Because, like, in case you did not know, like, your body, if you are able to conceive, your body, no, it's not even conceive, if you're able to be pregnant, your body needs time to heal between babies. And if she had a baby every year, that means like she had at most, because babies take 9 months, you know, to grow in your body. She had at most 3 months to heal between 4 children. I mean, that could just be me nitpicking again, because by the end of the book, I was just so upset by her behavior that I was like, fuck this shit, I'm out. And I was looking at every little thing and being hypercritical of it all. Hypercritical of like the brothers showing up because like Daphne goes to London alone after her little attack. And they get all upset with Simon because they're like, where were you? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe recovering from the fact that his wife raped him? And honestly, it really does feel like a Me Too for men. Like, this is what happens when men get sexually assaulted, and how like other men treat them and how women treat them as if it's not a big deal because, you know, whatever nonsense. Like, I can't even think of one right now, and I don't want to think of one. It's still like I finished the book last night and I had to like record this because it just makes me so angry, and I really need to get it out of my system because I don't think I can read something else without getting this off of my chest. And so I'm really disappointed. It was a really good book. It's really well written until that point. And yeah, it happens within like the last like 20-30 pages, and then it pushes through the reunion and everybody being happy and okay and la-di-da. And it was so unnecessary because honestly, the first 5 chapters of this book is the first ball where the Duke meet. And every chapter bounces between Daphne and the Duke. And it's such a long beginning. And I was like, are we going to move past it? Like, every chapter it ended, I was like, oh, are we already skipping to the next scene? Like, no, it was still the same scene, except it started through Simon's perspective and then it flipped to Daphne's perspective. And it was just so long. And I was like, why are we taking such a long time to get through this? And there were some scenes that were really unnecessary, but I guess they were trying to show like the friendship between Simon and Daphne growing. And I could totally understand that. But like, we don't need so many chapters. Like, just get to the good things and like, let's move on to the next one. And maybe instead of like rushing through your end by putting in this terrible interaction, why don't you take the time that you had at the beginning and input it at the end and actually like draw out how marriage life is actually like, and how, you know, you can have heartfelt conversations about somebody else's trauma without, you know, pushing them to do what you want when you want, because what you think is best, obviously. So yeah, I'm honestly, again, only giving the second book a chance because fans say it gets better and there's not that stupidity in it. And because her writing is actually good. And like how she constructs the world is actually good. So I can see why it was chosen to be turned into a show. I can see why like other people kept wanting to read her other books. But I don't understand why that scene exists. Like, I guess it's a testament to the time. And I guess, we just take it as a learning thing. But like, I don't know. Just don't. I don't even know, man. Just like skip the last 30 pages and just read the last 2 pages. And then they're arguing a lot anyways because of the fact that, okay, so like basically what you can do, I just thought of this now. You can read to the point where she finds out that he can't have children with her, or he's choosing not to have children with her, and they get into an argument, and then you can skip to the part where she's in London and just ignore that whole nonsense and then go from there. And yeah, you'll be confused as to why like he's not with her and he's in another part of his like another estate and she's saying she's not pregnant, but it doesn't really matter, okay? Like, live with the confusion. It'll do you better than like actually reading through this nonsense. And yeah, thank you for listening to me rant. I hope, I don't even know, man, I hope you got something out of this, whether like you decide not to read it or at least it gives you a better understanding of what to expect, because I was expecting something like the show and I got something completely different in terms of pacing, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, I can see why people were really upset by this and are still upset by this. And instead of me like continuing to ramble on about the same thing over and over again, I'm gonna say thank you all for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely day. And yeah, I need to hear good things, so if you want to leave a nice little comment, that'd be lovely. And I'll see you all next time. Have a lovely rest of your day. And I'll talk to you all soon. Take care.